everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of What the Forensics. My name is Rebecca, and I am joined here again today by my wonderful co-hosts, Journey and Nicole. This week, Nicole is going to be telling us all about the case study of David Berkowitz, and Journey is going to be telling us and leading our discussion about the Satanic Panic. And while the Son of Sam and Satanic Panic are not directly related to one another, they are linked in terms of the fact that they both involve Satanism and both sparked a lot of fear regarding that topic. So just before we get started, I would like to note that we do have a listener's discretion, as there are detailed descriptions of shooting and child abuse during this episode. But with that being said, I'm so excited to get into it. David Berkowitz is such a famous case, and I honestly know like nothing about it. So I can't wait to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole, would you care to lead us down the story of David Berkowitz?
I would love to. I will say his story is honestly not as exciting as I first thought. But it is interesting to see like where Satanism and the whole Son of Sam stuff comes in during his case, and kind of how we can tie that back into where you go with this journey. But to start, Berkowitz, he was born in 1953, but he was born under the name of Richard David Falco in Brooklyn, New York. He was then adopted by Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, and they decided to keep his name, but ended up just like reversing it. So then he became David Richard Berkowitz rather than Richard David. He supposedly had a fascination with pyromania and petty theft while growing up, and he had a few behavioral issues and problems that resulted in his parents reaching out to therapists or to therapy. But he never ended up getting a diagnosis recorded for himself, and there was no legal intervention actually taken for his behavioral issues. His adoptive mom is then said to pass away when he was 14 years old because of from breast cancer, and his adoptive father ended up remarrying a woman who I guess Berkowitz really just didn't seem to like at that point. At the age of 18, he enrolled in the U.S. Army, and in 1971, he served time in South Korea. While he was in Korea, it was said that he had his first sexual encounter, and this was with a prostitute where he ended up contracting gonorrhea. I don't know why this information is like prevalent in the sources that I've read, but it was just something that was mentioned. And so I was like, might as well. Why not throw it into this, you know?
That's kind of a rough first time for him.
Yeah. Not off to a great start.
No.
Which I could see maybe causing him to like harbor resentment towards women or towards sexual behaviors. I don't know. By 1974, he was honorably discharged from the army, and it was around this time that he sought out his birth mother. But she and his biological sister apparently didn't want anything to do with Berkowitz. But during their like few communications, his mom did tell him about the illegitimacy of his birth, and so how his biological father was actually the biological mom's like lover, but he had been married to someone else when she was conceived. So this kind of caused a bit of a shift in his perception of himself and like the sense of identity. And people will say that this is kind of the catalyst to what came next, what kind of sent him over the edge.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Was his sister older or younger?
That I don't know. I want to say younger, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, because I feel like if I had been like put up for adoption and I found out I had older siblings, I'd be like, why would you keep them and not me? You know?
Yeah.
So I feel like that
really
could
fair.
also have added something to his sense of identity.
Yeah. And I don't know if like the biological sister was still being parented by his biological mom. I assume so based on the sources that I read.
Right.
But it could very well be she may have also been put up for adoption. But I don't think that was the case.
That makes sense.
His own account, though, not a lot, but some of the sources that I read came from like Berkowitz himself. So that being said, take it with a grain of salt. It's kind of hard to hear what a serial killer has to say and believe it for fact.
Yep.
But once he was out of the service, Berkowitz had said that he lived in New York City, where he had met some guys at a party that he later found out to be involved with the occult. He was supposedly always fascinated by witchcraft, Satanism, and the occult while growing up, and he had seen countless horror movies and satanic movies, one being Rosemary's Baby, which captivated his mind. Never seen the movie, but sounds like a good one.
We talk a lot more about the influence of satanic film and the media
Mm-hmm.
during my section.
Okay, noted. By 22, he felt that an evil force was reaching out to him and that he was seeing signs and symbols everywhere that had pointed him to Satan. He began reading the Satanic Bible and began to practice various occult rituals and incantations, apparently. On Christmas Eve of 1975 is when Berkowitz kind of started with his crimes and killings. He had attacked 2 women with a knife and hospitalized one of them, but both ultimately ended up surviving. Shortly after this, he ended up moving to Yonkers in New York. Which one? Love that that's a place. Yonkers.
I was about to say, side note, what a fun name.
What a fun name. On July 29th of 1976, Berkowitz then shot Jody Valenti and Donna Loria while they were in Jody's car. He pulled out a pistol from a paper bag he was carrying and shot at both of the women. Donna was killed, and then Jody was shot in the thigh, ultimately surviving her injuries. It is important to note, too, that I guess Berkowitz, a very common theme is that he always came up on the passenger side of the car, and they believe a possibility as to why is because oftentimes in these like lovers lanes areas where he would target, the woman would often be in the passenger side and then the men would be in the driver's side. So he was more so interested in harming the woman than the men in the situation.
Interesting.
A theory that exists.
Yeah.
A few months later, on October 23rd, 1976, Carl De Niro and Rosemary Keenan were sitting in Rosemary's car when out of nowhere, the windows of the vehicle shattered. Shattered. Instinctively, Rosemary had started the car and quickly drove away, so she had been driving this time. Carl had been shot in the head, and he miraculously survived, though, but he did sustain a wound that would require a metal plate to later repair.
Wow.
Yeah, the amount of victims that survived his shootings are shocking. Like, there was a lot of people.
Is he classified as a serial killer, or is he like a serial attacker?
No, he's classified as a serial killer. He's killed 6 people total.
Okay.
But he injured a lot more.
Okay.
The next shooting was just after midnight on November 27th, and Joanne Lomino and Donna DeMasi were chatting on Joanne's front porch after having just seen a movie together. And then all of a sudden, a man dressed in military fatigues had walked up to them and began talking to them as if he was going to ask them for directions or something along the lines of that. And then he ended up just pulling out a gun and shot both of the women. Joanne was shot in her back and was left a paraplegic. And then Donna received an injury to her neck, and both women survived, however.
Wow. I'm shocked in that scenario that he wouldn't have, stayed to make sure that they were dead, you know?
Yeah, I think he was very quick to flee.
Yeah.
Like, he just shot and was like, well, hope that happened. He didn't want to stay around to guess or to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Risk being caught, maybe?
Yeah, fair enough.
Christine Freund and her fiance John Deal were in John's car after just having seen a movie. Just before 1 a.m., shots were then fired into the car, causing John, similar to the previous victim, similar to Rosemary, to drive off in a panic, trying to get help. Christine, unfortunately, was shot twice and would later succumb to her injuries, but John did survive this attack. And then on March 8th, 1977, Virginia Voskarician, probably butchered that, She was shot in the head and killed while walking home from Columbia University. This one was very not similar to the other killings. And she seemed to stand out compared to the others. Like everyone else was kind of in a car in a lover's lane. So I'm not positive what changed for this kind of killing.
Yeah. If it was just like a momentary, like, oh, I need to kill you now.
Yeah. Possibly. Just over a month later, on April 17th, around 3 a.m., Alexander Asau and Valentina Suriani were in Valentina's car, not from her house, when a man had come up and shot both of them twice. Valentina died from her wounds, and then Alexander died hours later in the hospital. But after these murders, a note had been written and addressed to the police captain, Joseph Borelli, and the note was found near their car. I'm going to read it. It's an excerpt from the book Mindhunter.
Ooh.
The note read, "I am deeply hurt by your calling me a women hater. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat." When Father Sam gets...
Summer. I'm sorry.
It is brat summer. It really is. Yeah. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. "Go out and kill," commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young, raped and slaughtered, their blood drained, just bones now. Pap Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I'm on a different wavelength than everybody else, programmed to kill. However, to stop me, you must kill me. Attention all police. Shoot me first. Shoot to kill, or else keep out of my way, or you will die. Papa Sam is old now. He needs some blood to preserve his youth. He has had too many heart attacks. Ugh, me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy. I miss my pretty princess most of all. She's resting in Our Lady's house, but I'll see her soon. I am the monster, Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. The women of Queens are prettiest of all. I must be the water they drink. I live for the hunt, my life. Blood for Papa. Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill anymore. No, sir, no more, but I must. Honor thy father. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong on earth. Return me to Yahoos. To the people of Queens, I love you, and I want to wish all of you a happy Easter. May God bless you in this life and in the next. And for now I say goodbye and good night. Police! Let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. To be interpreted as bang, 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 bang. Ugh. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster.
That was so unhinged.
And so unhinged, so grammatically incorrect. Just everything about it.
It's just like
a bit comical, I will say.
Yeah, it's just a stream of consciousness of a serial killer.
Mm-hmm. And so he wrote this, left a note, and then after this, he just started continuing with all of these ravings and all of these notes to letters written in newspapers and written to journalists. So he kind of kept up this correspondence, which is a part of how like the son of Sam became known in the media.
Yeah. Do we ever find out who Papa Sam is? Because it sounds like he's talking about a real person.
Yeah. So I have some discussion on that in a little bit.
Okay.
There's like interpretations on it. And I just had seen a interview that he had done talking about, as I'll get into, like this dog that there's theory around, and then some misinterpretation of that.
Okay. I also really enjoy signing off the letter yours in murder.
Yeah. Mr. Monster.
Like what a great like tagline for a podcast or something. It was like yours in murder.
Yours in
Journey,
murder.
Nicole and Rebecca.
Lots of love. See you next week.
Yeah, literally.
Be safe. Lots of love.
Yeah.
Yours in murder.
Yours in murder.
But yeah, so that note was written. Didn't stop him there, though. He kept killing because on June 26th of 1977, Sal Lupo and Judy Placido were shot while sitting in Sal's car around 3 a.m. So a lot of common themes of them being in cars, it being past midnight in kind of this Lover's Lane area. He was shot in the forearm while Judy received gunshots to her temple, shoulder, and neck. And remarkably, they both survived the attack.
Oh.
So in the early hours of July 31st, 1977, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante were sitting in their parked car when someone had fired 4 shots into the vehicle. Both Stacy and Robert were shot in the head. However, Robert survived, but he ended up losing an eye and suffering serious damage to his vision of his other eye. Unfortunately, Stacy would later pass in the hospital. And this attack, though, had quite a few eyewitnesses, and it was witnessed by a handful of people. Someone had been parked 3 cars ahead of where Robert and Stacy were sitting, and he had seen a man approaching the car. And because of the nearby streetlights and just the light from the moon, the eyewitness did manage to get a decent look at the suspect and ended up providing the police with a description. Another eyewitness ended up contacting the police after the shooting of Moskowitz and Violante, and she had told them that night she had seen a car being ticketed due to parking too close to a fire hydrant, and so a man had then walked past her, looking at her as if he was studying her, and that's when she kind of rushed home, and along the way she apparently heard shots as she was running home.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So police ended up looking into the vehicles that were ticketed on the street the evening of the shooting, and that had led them to discover Berkowitz's car, which was a yellow 4-door Ford Galaxy. And the Yonkers police had been suspicious about Berkowitz leading up to this, and they ended up filling investigators in on their concerns that he may be the same person as the son of Sam. And it's of note, at this point, there was a task force of approximately over 200 cops looking for this son of Sam person, or whoever these shootings were.
Wow.
He had really caused quite the panic in the community with a lot of his ravings that he submitted to the newspapers and with all of these shootings. Because of the parking ticket connection, police ended up going to Berkowitz's home in August of 1977, where they had found a rifle just sitting in plain view in his car, on his car seat. So they ended up searching the car with no warrant, mind you, but they did find more items of interest that connected him to the shootings.
So because they searched his car with no warrant, anything they found can't be used as grounds for getting another warrant or as evidence in the case, or it's basically null and void.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was a probable cause search, if they could use and justify that.
Okay.
But they didn't really need it. They did ask for a formal search warrant. But Berkowitz ended up coming outside before they got their formal search warrant. He ended up being arrested at gunpoint. But upon his, it took him less than a half hour for him to be like, yeah, I did it. I killed them all.
Wow.
So, they didn't really need the evidence or the search warrant. They just were like, okay, we got you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess when police arrested them, I guess a detective had said, who have I got? To which Berkowitz purportedly responded, I'm Sam. And then another source had mentioned when he was confronted by the police, Berkowitz had just said, well, you got me. And then within a half hour, he was confessing to the crimes.
Wow.
Upon his arrest too, and these investigations or interrogations, this is where kind of the discrepancy comes about and the media's cause in how this information was shared. It said that he claimed that his former neighbor, Sam Carr, had a black lab by the name of Harvey that was possessed by a 3,000-year-old demon who commanded Berkowitz to kill. And so this demon dog apparently wanted the blood of pretty girls.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah. And so the psychiatric community had kind of accepted this as his story. And they're like, yeah, exactly. That tracks. That makes sense to your motivation on all of these things. But it's important to note that the story didn't emerge until after he was arrested. And so it's believed just to be a cop-out by him. And so John Douglas, a retired criminal profiler with the FBI, he had actually interviewed Berkowitz at Attica State Prison. And he started talking about, when Berkowitz started talking about the dog, Douglas basically was just like, cut the crap. We know that's not real. And he's like, you got me. Like, he just kind of laughed and nodded and was like, yeah, you're right. Like, it doesn't really have much meaning. Yeah. And so I saw another interview with him. This was later on, many, many years later. He had mentioned that the dog actually had nothing to do with his crimes and that it was the media that kind of really pushed that narrative.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so supposedly what he was trying to communicate or say or whatever was that, do you guys know of like Samhain? Yeah. So it was Samhain, but he was pronouncing it Samhain. And so he was saying that he was communicating with this deity Samhain, that it was just ended up being a big ball of miscommunication. And so I think this Sam from the Samhain, which should be Samhain, is like who he was saying he was actually communicating with.
Right. So my understanding of Samhain was that it's, we did an episode on it. We talked about it.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think it was a god.
It's like a druid deity of some sort, I believe.
Yeah, for some reason I was under the impression that it was like Halloween.
It happens around Halloween when the veil between this world and the next world is the thinnest. And so it's thought that like all the ghosts and stuff are close. So you have to like, they like burn a bunch of fires and so that it covers the world in ash, and they do a whole bunch of like ritual things that have evolved into Halloween to like appease these spirits and make it so that you're not taken by them.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't realize that there was like an actual like deity or god with it as well.
Neither. That's really cool.
I think he's making up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I will say.
No, maybe that tracks, yeah. That also makes sense.
Like, not to say there's no Samhain and there's no druidic deity, but
yeah,
it just feels like he's spewing stuff and like saying stuff happened when maybe it didn't. I don't genuinely think he was. He also said he like became schizophrenic, and like I don't know if that's kind of what happens, but all right. So he was saying like it was his schizophrenia that caused it. It was his practice of devil worshipping that led him to it, and it was just kind of a mixed bag of things. So
right,
could have been a 3,000-year-old demon dog telling him to kill people, could have been some druidic deity, but either way he was apparently under the influence of something.
Very much so.
He ended up pleading guilty to all 6 murders, and then he was sentenced to 25 years to life for each of the murders to be served consecutively. His life was almost taken from him in 1979. He was attacked by an unnamed inmate from behind, slashed his throat, caused him to have about 50 plus sutures to fix or to heal. Yeah, it was a pretty doozy one. And then what's interesting, given the whole satanic talk and Satanism and whatnot, while he was in prison, about 10 years into his sentence, another inmate had come up to him while he was out walking in the yard or whatever, and basically told Berkowitz that Jesus Christ loves you and Jesus Christ wants to forgive you. Initially, Berkowitz had mocked him, despite knowing that he meant well. He just didn't believe that God would ever forgive him for something for what he had done in the past.
Right.
Which, like, I can understand that. But the other inmate had really persisted on the fact that Jesus was going to forgive him. They ended up becoming friends, and Berkowitz was gifted a Gideon's Pocket Testament, and this is something that he read every night, and he began to pour his heart into his belief really heavily in 1987. He supposedly had found God through his learnings, and instead of being the son of Sam, he now goes by the son of Hope. And Berkowitz has his own website, ariseandshine.org, where he's got a whole bunch of content on that. So he has like an apology, he's got his testimony. Mind you, it's in English and translated into 11 different languages, just in case.
That's so generous of him. Wow.
I know. The only thing translated from what I could see on his site. He also has journal entries dating back to 2003 up until present year.
Wow.
Monthly, too, it seemed like.
Oh my goodness.
And of note, he has a section dedicated to Satanists. And it's a section to help them see that Jesus Christ, word for word, is a zillion times greater than Satan's power. And so there's just a lot on his website in terms of like his faith and his beliefs, but also Satanism too, and like how that was the wrong path that he chose.
I'm just surprised they're letting him do this from prison.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I don't know if he himself personally is upkeeping these sites or if he's been granted like privileges to do so. But yeah. He also has like books and stuff, and that's the whole thing. It's like I don't know if he's monetizing off of this. Can he monetize? That's a whole other conversation.
I don't think he can. Legally, I don't think he's allowed to accept any of the money. So I don't know where it would be going.
Right? Who knows? But yeah, he was eligible for parole after 25 years, but this was denied. So he was denied parole in 2002, 2016, and just recently, this past May of 2024. At the time of recording, he is alive and serving time at the Shawangunk Correctional Facility. This is a max security prison for males in New York. I wasn't really sure where to throw this in because it doesn't really have to do with anything, but it is a quote from David Berkowitz that was in one of the books I read. And apparently, I don't know when, I don't know what the context was, but he had supposedly said, "The demons wanted my penis." Like, that was it. That's all the context I had. That's all the information I got. But apparently, the demons were down bad.
Wanted man by somebody.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Do you think they meant like literally like chop it off and like sacrifice it to us? Or are they just like, wow,
honestly, with demons, I feel like it could go both ways.
Yeah. Right? Maybe a bit of both. Maybe an enjoyment first and then a sacrifice afterwards.
Yeah.
Either way, they want
so many possibilities when it comes to otherworldly creatures.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I love it.
But yeah, that's David Berkowitz. Sorry I rushed through that. It was just too long, don't read. He shot a lot of people in the cars. There's speculation that a dog told him to do it, and or a demon or druidic deity. But
interesting.
It's wild to me that he's still alive.
Yeah, he's like 71, still in prison.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but like I always picture David Berkowitz back in like Al Capone times.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I think it's his mugshot. Like his mugshot is very well known.
Yeah.
And it just kind of screams Al Capone.
Yeah, that's
very
fair.
much so.
I think that must be it. Yeah, but wow, I actually had no idea he was even still alive. But thank you so much, Nicole, for telling us all about that. I can definitely see where this could link to our next topic of discussion, the Satanic Panic. I mean, anything involving demons and deities someone will find a way to throw Satan in there. So I can't wait. Journey, would you like to lead us into this discussion on the Satanic Panic?
Yeah. So this is a wild ride. I have absorbed so much media about this that I'm having a hard time like organizing my thoughts about this. So if it's a bit disorganized, I apologize. But yes, the Satanic Panic was an era during the 1980s and 90s. So after David Berkowitz and all of his crimes had happened, and it was when many children and adults were convinced that they had been abducted and abused by satanic cults. And believe it or not, it all started in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada.
Woo, Canada, represent.
Yes, definitely not our best claim to fame, but one nonetheless.
It's one of them. It's there.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh,
classic.
Awesome.
Why is it always
Great.
BC too? Like you've got
Right?
Picton in BC, you got Satanic
Yeah.
Panic in BC,
Literally.
Highway of
Yeah.
Tears or whatever it's called. It's Highway of
the
Tears,
Highway
right?
of Tears. Yeah, Highway
Yeah.
16 in Prince George.
Yeah.
Yes. So going back to 1976. So a lot of this like happened at the time that David Berkowitz was really prevalent, but it didn't become well known until the 1980s. And so in 1976, a lady named Michelle Smith was in the hospital after having a miscarriage when she had had a dream about a spot on her hand that was itchy, so she scratched it, and then thousands of spiders came crawling out. So she called her therapist. I was like, I've had that dream 100 times. That doesn't mean I've been abducted by Satan.
Yeah.
So she called her therapist, Lawrence, who I'll be referring to as Larry Pazder, and she had told him about this dream, and he decided that they needed to resume therapy because they had previously done 4 years together 1 year prior to this happening.
Okay. So
they had taken a year off. For whatever reason, I don't know. We don't learn too much about their initial therapy sessions. So Larry, who is a psychiatrist who is married and had 4 kids, in 1964, he did some missionary medical work in Nigeria, where he was exposed to a lot of different rites and rituals, which he had never experienced before. He was a very devout Catholic man, but something that I find very interesting was that the nuns in Nigeria told him that he was evil and full of voodoo and should leave. But his wife and his daughter in the documentary that I watched described him very differently.
Okay.
He was just this loving, happy guy. At the same time, Michelle had married a man named Doug. She was a middle child with both a younger and an older sister. Growing up, her father was an alcoholic with a gambling problem and was quite violent toward his wife and kids. They ended up moving 8 or 9 times in 10 years when she was growing up due to her father's violence, and it was usually centered around the major holidays. Her dad would go on a rampage at home, and the kids would get picked up and taken to a hotel by the police so that they could be in a safe place and then interviewed about what happened. Michelle's mom was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and ended up passing away 12 years before Michelle started therapy with Larry. And her mom was intensely religious, and so when she died, she asked that she could be cremated and her ashes put in the crypt in her Catholic church. This is important for the story. And then also in 1976, there was a TV show called Sybil that was about a girl in therapy, and the girl then ended up in extreme therapy where she recounts horrific abuse at the hands of her mother. And so it was based on a book from 1973 and then turned into a TV show. And Larry Pazder really enjoyed watching this and told his wife that he wanted to do that. He didn't want to be an ordinary therapist and he wanted to be famous. He then told his wife, quote, "I've got a patient just like that," end quote, and called Michelle. And so I'm not really sure when this happened in relation to the miscarriage. But regardless, Michelle ended up phoning Larry multiple times a day after they started therapy again and almost like stalking his family, I guess. But anyways, this new round of therapy involved Michelle delving into her subconscious through a process that she made up herself. I don't really know what it entailed, but she described it as falling over backwards into the dark. And then that's where she would find the memories of this horrific abuse that happened at the hands of a satanic cult. And so these memories were from a 14-month period when she was 5 years old and her mother sold her to this satanic cult, supposedly. According to her memories, her mother was present at some of the rituals, and she describes her mom as someone who quote, gets involved with something but doesn't quite realize what they've gotten involved in, and then is in over their head and can't do anything about it, end quote. So that her mom didn't necessarily know what she was doing when she sold her to Satanists. One of her first memories was of a group of people who were gathered to do something, but she doesn't specify what. They were dancing in a way that she wasn't used to, and there were candles and the walls were draped in black. In the documentary that I watched, she used the term like in a way that I wasn't used to, or I had never seen it like this before. And it felt very, very interesting because it was kind of describing that this is bad because I've never seen it before, not actually giving a reason why it was bad in terms of like the dancing or whatever.
Mm-hmm. She's like, it's new to me. I don't like that. I'm going to say it's bad.
Exactly. Some of the memories that she was able to remember, I guess, that are actually bad include having dead kittens thrown at her while she was lying in an open grave. This is not funny. Being put inside a replica of Lucifer. Being tortured and prodded. Satan speaking in rhymes to Michelle. Being made to eat feces. Dismembering fetuses. Orgies. Being trapped for days in a pit of snakes. An 81-day-long ceremony where Satan himself appeared. And many others. You can read the book Michelle Remembers and learn more.
Okay.
So that's what she remembers. After it kind of became evident to Larry that she was finding repressed memories of being abused by Satanists, they went to their Catholic church and brought in Father Guy, who's a Catholic priest from Victoria, who they both knew very well. And then after hearing what she was, quote unquote, remembering, Father Guy decided that they needed to involve Bishop Remy DeRue and go to the Pope about this. So in 1977, they flew to Rome and told the Pope about Michelle's repressed memories. And he was like, that's the devil or something. I don't remember what he said, but it was along the lines of like, yeah, that's not good.
That's kind of crazy, though. They were just like pulled up to the Vatican and they're like, hey, my daughter's possessed. Like, does the Pope take appointments?
Right? I didn't think so, but he was very welcoming. Yeah. So, that Larry had been recording all of these sessions with Michelle, which made it easier to show the Pope like what was going on. Some of these sessions ended up being like 6 hours long. Larry would then send these recordings to one of Michelle's friends who would transcribe them, and she would, quote, fill in as much missing words and sounds as she could, end quote.
Don't like that.
Yeah, I don't like that either. I was like, that's... Like, the margin for error on that
is intelligible.
Yeah.
I think, too, them being repressed memories, one, and then also the transcriber just kind of having free creative licensing to it all is fascinating.
Yeah, and I hardly touch on the fact that they are repressed memories and human memory is infallible and like that whole rabbit hole, because I'm hoping that most of our audience knows
by now. Yeah,
they've heard us preach about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, she would fill in missing words. So love that. She would then send the transcriptions back to Larry, and he would write his interpretations of what Michelle was saying in the margins, and then send them back to get written up with his additions. So he'd kind of be like, "Oh, this dream of a spider could be like whatever." Like dream interpretation or whatever, which is, as we also
on
know,
top of it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of like his interpretations can be linked back to what he experienced and what he saw when he was in Nigeria.
Oh.
And so he didn't understand what he was seeing in Nigeria, but he's using it to explain this thing that Michelle's supposedly remembering. I don't know. It's just a whole recipe for disaster. So they then turned these notes into a book titled Michelle Remembers, and it was released in 1980, and it took the world by storm. It exploded everywhere. The Catholic Church actually ended up giving Michelle and Larry a $10,000 subsidy for their book, and both the bishop,
at that time too. Wow,
damn, right. And And the bishop and the priest, like Father Guy, who helped them, also wrote forewords for the book as well, I'm pretty sure. So
A little part of
the
me feels like we shouldn't incentivize being possessed, but I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know enough about it.
Exactly. So they went on a book tour and they made a lot of money off of this. And then for 2 years after releasing the book, they traveled all over the US. And I don't know if they ever left the US or not. Well, obviously, like, they came to Canada and stuff. But I don't know if they went overseas. And once their book tour ended, they started like a speaking tour where they traveled to a bunch of different like police conferences as well. And so as a result of this book popularity, the idea of Satanists operating in the shadows of small town America was very, very prevalent and also spread like wildfire. And the Church of Satan actually sued Michelle and Larry for defamation, and they ended up having to take most of the references to this Church of Satan out of their book. And Anton LaVey, who was the leader of the Church of Satan, he was kind of like eating up the publicity, is what it kind of felt like to me. And he used it to create a name for himself as the high priest of Satan. And he said that his church didn't actually worship Satan. They just used Satan and satanic images as symbols for questioning society. And the rituals they performed were only for shock value and didn't involve murder or violence. So that was their thoughts around it, I guess. And during this time, Pazder became the guru of deciphering when a child had been abused. He also started using the term satanic ritual abuse, or SRA. And so that is a special form of childhood sexual abuse where there are allegations of Satan worship, torture, ritual sacrifice of animals and humans, and cannibalism, along with sexual abuse.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. And after Michelle Remembers became more famous, it triggered a flood of claims of ritual abuse. And there have been a variety of like books, magazine articles, and talk shows that feature ritual abuse survivors. And then there's like, for their speaking tour, they were going to conferences about satanic cults and teaching people how to spot Satan and how to investigate potential satanic abuse cases and satanic cults. Michelle and Larry also said that newborns at hospitals were prime targets for Satanists, so hospitals throughout the US had upped their security to prevent people from taking their babies. Because at one point there was a rumor that was picked up and presented as fact that thousands and thousands of children were missing because the Satanists were taking them. And each year, 2 million children were being kidnapped and sacrificed in the US, which accounted for 54% of all children born in the US in a year.
I'm like pretty sure we would have heard about that sooner.
Yeah. We would have had a trail to follow of like actual documented instances.
Yeah. And so like the one guy in the documentary who was saying that was like 54%. There's no possible way
that's true.
Exactly. You got to use your critical thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, fear mongering. It was presented as fact. Everyone believed it. No one wanted their kids to get kidnapped and taken. And a huge part of it was that there was just too many similar sounding stories for it to be fake. That was the biggest belief. Some noteworthy cases that I want to talk about are the McMartin case, the Paul Ingram case, and the Martinsville Nightmare.
Nice.
But these are just the tip of the iceberg. There are literally thousands of cases that are almost identical to these. So the McMartin case was when this lady named Judy Johnson had sent her 2-year-old to McMartin preschool. And after a few days, she began to notice blood in her son's diaper and potential evidence that he had been sodomized.
Ooh.
And so this was happening in 1983. Obviously, very scary as a parent to think that that's happening to your kid around adults that you're supposed to trust.
Yeah.
So she accused this young male employee named Ray Bucky of sexually assaulting her son, as well as the owner's daughter and granddaughter.
Ooh.
And at first, the doctors didn't find any signs of abuse. But then they sent the kid to UCLA, where the suspected child abuse and neglect team agreed that he had been sexually assaulted.
Ooh.
So they arrested Bucky. At some point, the local police chief sent a letter to the other 200 parents of children at that preschool, kind of informing them of like what was going on.
Rightfully so. I think that's something all parents should
Yeah,
Should
exactly.
be, notified of. Yeah.
Maybe not names if it hasn't been proven that Bucky has done this, but like that this is going on.
Yeah, it felt like, I understand why they sent the letter, but it felt a bit premature.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they sent a letter explaining what was going on with Bucky. He urged parents to talk to their kids and ask if they had ever spent any time alone with Bucky or if they had seen him tie up a child.
Jesus, that's some leading questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially if there wasn't any evidence of being tied up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also, like, to ask a preschooler that, like,
what?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Something.
So shortly after this letter was sent, a group of child sex abuse specialists arrived in Manhattan Beach to interview the children with methods that are now discredited because duh.
Yep.
And they did include asking very leading questions. And you were asking a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or your 4-year-old, right? Like,
yeah,
they're young.
I'm pretty sure you have to be at least 4 to act as a witness. There's like some age too because of just a child's mind and credibility.
Yeah. And it's like, it's tricky because if your kid comes to you and says, oh, I've been sexually assaulted at this preschool, and you're not just going to go, no, you haven't.
Yeah.
Because what if
you're a child?
right?
You don't know any better. Like,
yeah.
that's not ideally going to happen, but
yeah, it's kind of a very nuanced situation where you want to believe them, but you also don't, and you just, you don't know. But either way, the preschool was shut down. It was searched and then destroyed by law enforcement. The grounds of the preschool were then dug up because one child testified that he had been flushed down a toilet to a dungeon. And so they were searching for the tunnels that led to this dungeon.
the police believed that the child was flushed down a toilet.
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow.
Okay.
They never found the tunnels.
Shocker.
And the source that I read this in actually brought up a really interesting point where they were like, if you've been around children, that claim sounds crazy. You're just like, wow, how could they ever dream of thinking of something like this? Like, it has to be true because how else would they think of it?
Yeah.
But if you're around kids, it kind of sounds similar to a level in Super Mario.
Yeah.
And
you're just
like,
going down a pipe and you go somewhere else. Yep.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
I didn't even consider that.
They brought up the fact that the people who were dealing with hadn't spent a lot of time around kids and didn't really understand how a kid's brain works. The children also testified that not only were they sexually abused, but they also saw their teachers fly, murder animals, and sacrifice a baby to Satan.
I want to know how many of these kids knew the word Satan before all of this.
Yeah, exactly. All of their testimonies were taken at face value, even the ones that were clearly too young to tell the difference between fantasy and reality, kind of like we've mentioned. And this was a really, really pivotal time in history because people were starting to believe child sexual abuse cases. And so they were taking them seriously and openly discussing them. So it just kind of snowballed into this disaster.
Yeah.
And so apparently children had been like initially interviewed. Nothing had really come of it. So then they created this new interview research group team to re-interview the kids a couple years later. And some of their answers changed. So they had initially denied that Bucky had molested them, but then changed their answers. And then allegations were renewed in 1984. So I guess a year later.
Okay.
Despite the lack of evidence, the owners and several teachers at the school were arrested and charged with 321 counts of child abuse.
Holy shit.
Yeah, on 48 children.
Wow.
No evidence of the tunnels, child molestation, pornography, or sacrifice have ever been found. The trial lasted from 1987 to 1990 with a 19-month preliminary trial and was the longest in America's history. It cost $15 million, had 63,000 pages of testimony, 927 exhibits, and 124 witnesses.
Wow.
I had no idea the Satanic Panic resulted in like that sort of
Actual
effort.
charges,
You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, sorry for lack of better term, but like effort, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they were lucky because all the defendants were found not guilty or had their charges dropped due to the lack of evidence. But some people, like the next case I'm going to talk about, spent jail time because of these things.
That's also alarming that this was just one case and there are thousands like it.
Yeah, this was the biggest one. It's used as like one of the primary examples of satanic ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so 7 jurors believed that a few of the children had been molested, but it was by someone other than anyone in the McMartin school. And so it was kind of like in every story, there's a thread of truth or whatever. Yeah. And I think that plays a huge role in like all of these cases, especially with Michelle, because of the abuse she suffered at the hands of her father. Like she could have been drawing on feelings from that as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, Michelle and Larry went down for the trial, and she ended up spending a lot of time with the children because she could kind of relate and empathize with what had happened to them and ask them more leading questions. And
as
then,
one does.
Yep. In 1883 or 84, more and more daycare cases were exposed, and investigators were using Michelle as a baseline. And so when they were developing questions for the children, they're basing it on what Michelle experienced to help them classify what they had experienced and understand what had happened to them. So it was kind of just like using this one person who we don't even know if what happened to her was true as the basis for every single case ever about it.
Yeah.
Something else that a lot of the sources mentioned regarding the McMartin case was that Judy Johnson was a diagnosed schizophrenic.
Nice.
Yeah, so I feel like that played a role, but I don't know to what extent, right?
Yeah.
And so the next case that I want to talk about is the Paul Ingram case. And so Paul Ingram was a police officer and a member of the Pentecostal sect in Washington. I thought that meant Satan, but it's just a Christian church. After the Pentecostal retreat for girls that Paul's teenage daughters had attended, they came home and accused him of molesting them. Ingram denied any memory of this, but said that he believed his daughters, so he must be repressing his memory of the abuse.
His daughters, but also very, very unfortunate.
Right?
Not a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And to doubt yourself so much, be like, I don't remember doing that, but my daughter said I did, so I must have.
Yeah. Like, because, yeah, that's so sad.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. His daughters also accused 2 other people of sexual assault in the police force. Ingram supposedly began to remember the events with the help of interviewers and recalled that those 2 other people were also involved.
With the help of the other 2 interviewers, yep.
A pastor from their church, Pastor Bratton, helped Ingram develop a technique for remembering. That's another thing that really ticks me off about this case is that they're developing their own ways to access their repressed memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it'd be different if they were using methods that are like tried and true and like tested by like psychologists, but they're just coming up with new ways.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, due to this technique, Ingram started to have memories of people in robes gathered around a fire, with one of them cutting out the heart of a black cat. Ingram's wife was also accused of sexual abuse by their daughters. Initially, Mrs. Ingram couldn't remember this, but was eventually able to. The daughters now recalled satanic rites, animal sacrifice, being burned, cut with knives, and the sacrifice of a baby.
Whose baby?
Just one of
Hey,
them.
baby.
Yeah,
Just one of the 56% that were stolen from hospitals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There were also theories that people would like be forced to get pregnant and then have the babies just so they could sacrifice it. It's fucked up.
Yeah.
One of the daughters said that her father forced her to have sexual intercourse with goats and dogs and took photos of this.
Oh,
I
show
guess
me the proof.
bestiality would have been a good trigger warning.
Yeah. Nah. Leave it in.
Yeah,
It's always
so
a
that
fun
happened.
surprise when we throw out a random one.
Yeah.
Keeps you on your toes.
Exactly. Okay, so this part's really gross and I apologize.
Okay.
At his trial, one of his daughters described about 25 infant sacrifices and claimed that she had been impregnated and then aborted, like forced to abort the pregnancy.
Mhm.
And then the abortion was then cut up and rubbed all over her body.
Oh,
Okay.
Which is
that's interesting.
Ingram claimed to be able to recall the events described by his daughters by using the memory technique that Pastor Bratton assured would bring him only the truth. This next part also pisses me right off. So they brought in an outside consultant to test Ingram to see if he was telling the truth or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so this person was like, okay, I'm going to accuse him with something new that no one has admitted to yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so at first, Ingram had like vague memories, I guess, and was told to pray on it. And his memories became more clear at the second meeting. And then by the third meeting, he fully confessed to it.
That's crazy.
God.
And his daughter, who they also like brought this accusation to, never like said she remembered it or it happened.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah,
And
like
so-
shouldn't they be using the like if this whole trial's based on the memory of the victim, why are they all of a sudden going off book of what the victim said and trying to there's a
Exactly.
lot about this that's really fishy.
Yeah. And it's like, why wasn't that used to like get him off of the accusations or whatever? Like you kind of proved that he's just remembering whatever you're telling him he needs to remember.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Either way, he prayed and visualized with Pastor Bratton and produced a list of 10 other alleged cult members who were all present or former employees of the sheriff's office. Wow. He pleaded guilty to 6 counts of rape. Charges against the other 2 people who were accused earlier had been dropped. His one daughter said that about 30 Satanists controlled the county government and that there has been a cover-up. And was kind of like upset that her dad was the only one who was charged and convicted. And so Paul Ingram finally started to have doubts about his memories of satanic rites before his sentencing, but was still sentenced a 20-year prison term.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently his son also accused him of abuse in 1996 when he was between the ages of 4 to 12.
My goodness.
It's crazy that you can get 20 years of prison for something that you have like no tangible physical proof.
Yeah.
You know?
I know.
Yeah.
It's also
repressed
just
memories.
Yeah.
And it's gross because this is supposed to be like child abuse and like there's real offenders against children that don't get that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's gross.
And so, a very important fact about this case that was downplayed was that before the allegations, one of Ingram's daughter read the book titled Satan's Underground, which is very similar to Michelle Remembers and could have majorly influenced her memories, similar to how the book Michelle Remembers started the Satanic Panic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last case I'll mention is the Martinsville Nightmare. And I'm only including it because my sister went to a wedding there a couple weeks ago.
Oh, what a coincidence. Okay.
And when my mom, she said when she heard that my sister was going to Martinsville, she was like nervous because it's still associated with this case. And it's still, yeah, she was like nervous. She's like, no, it's okay. It's fine.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. She had the initial like gut instinct of like, oh, that's so scary. I shouldn't let you go.
Mm-hmm.
But it was where a daycare in small town Saskatchewan had been accused of harboring a murderous cult, a satanic cult, and 9 people faced charges despite a complete lack of evidence. That was pretty much all the information I could find on it. because I didn't listen to the podcast that talks about it. So if you want to learn more about it, it's the CBC podcast Uncover talks about it in their season 6 episode titled Satanic Panic.
Cool.
But yeah, crazy. So getting back to Larry and Michelle, this is all happening during their book tour, during their speaking tours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, this is happening like between, well, I guess like the McMartin case ended in 1990.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So it happened
Wow.
between 1980 and 1990.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're traveling around the country as experts on satanic ritual abuse, as more and more people are remembering being victims of this abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And in the documentary, there's a quote from a lady that goes, "You would have patients who had essentially the Michelle experience, where suddenly you were logging enough hours on the couch in the depths to qualify as a full-time job, and where a doctor who you trust is telling you if there is anything wrong with you, it was a result of sexual abuse that you had forgotten, and probably satanic abuse, because apparently there's a lot of that, and you can read about it in this book that was a bestseller," end quote. Which just kind of sums up
Yeah.
the feelings.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so this book was really giving a lot of traction to false stories of fantastical horror, as one source put it. And it ended up destroying lives and leading to countless wrongful convictions. And there were reports of satanic crimes that began appearing around the country. And it was pretty much just every single crime, from petty vandalism, such as spray painting pentagrams or names of heavy metal bands on things, to missing pets and children. So everything. During one specific conference for police officers, Dr. Pazder was on stage and was saying that most of the cases coming forward were not true, and that he was going to tell you how to identify the real cases, which is something that police officers were really excited for, because that was obviously an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would describe these rituals and talk about Michelle. And if there were any questions, they would only be answered by him and not Michelle, who would just kind of like, she would be asked the question and then look to him to answer it.
So she was just there as a prop.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like just to show face, but wasn't providing any. Okay.
Yeah. And so when he was confronted by this, because one of the FBI agents who was there, Ken Lanning, he was like, "Why are you answering these questions if it's what, like, how do you know so much about this topic if it's what happened to Michelle?"
Yeah, if you didn't experience it yourself.
Fair.
Exactly. And he said, quote, "When she first came to me, she had no conscious memory of it, and the story began to come out over a year or more, and I recorded it and wrote it all down. And after that, most of it left her memory, and I am now the keeper of the story."
That's interesting. Why did it leave her memory?
Yeah,
That's not how repression works.
Yeah. And so Ken Lanning said that it greatly reduced the value of what Larry was saying. So he put his pen down and didn't take any notes after that. He was like, "You're full of shit."
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to.
Rightfully so.
So kind of adding on to that, it doesn't take much to call into question the validity of Michelle's claims. For one, she never missed a day of school during the 14th month period that she was taken by this cult. There are pictures of her in the yearbook. Like, you can prove.
Satan just wants her to have a good education. That's all.
Yeah.
You know?
But she was also like being like cut up and like tortured by Satan.
I forgot about that.
But there were no evidence of that. But she said it's because the angel Michael came down and healed her.
Yeah.
Oh, so the angel Michael also put her in the yearbook after the fact. Cool.
Exactly.
A lot of
That's
hands
awesome.
at work here.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Good job.
And so like during their therapy sessions, the boundaries between patient and doctor also became very blurred. And there's a theory, no one will say it's a theory, but they'll like heavily allude to it, that Michelle just made this all up to become closer to Larry and get more of his attention, because she was obsessed with him.
Don't like
she
that.
followed him from Victoria, BC to Edmonton, Alberta.
Yeah, not a fan of that at all.
And
what was the age difference again? Do you remember off the top of your head? Creepy. Don't like that.
It wasn't like a big age difference thing, I don't think. But anyway, they ended up divorcing their partners and marrying each other.
Ooh.
So that's nice. Another thing that kind of discredits her whole thing is that the rituals that were talked about in the book took place in a cemetery that was surrounded by houses, yet Michelle is the only one who remembers what happened.
Yeah. You would think at least one other person would hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If that was the case.
Or like look out the window and be like, oh, people in robes. That's weird.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. They're sacrificing a baby. That's so wild.
I should go check that out.
Yeah. Maybe I'll like call the police or something.
Nah.
No.
Let the 54% suffer. Or 66%.
And in like every case, there is no evidence of murder or the sacrifices that any of the victims, not just Michelle, like claimed to see.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just kind of like, oh, well, like the body was burned, or like, oh, people ate the body. Or one girl was like, they turned the baby into candle wax.
Oh.
Oh. Okay.
So there's ways of disposing bodies, I guess.
And they're all masters at it, yeah.
Yeah, so no evidence, Anyway, there was also a lot of dead baby imagery throughout this book, which makes sense when you remember that she had had a miscarriage before this had all started.
Oh, yeah.
So the dead baby imagery can just be attributed to the grief that she was feeling about losing her child.
Mm-hmm.
So that explains that. It was also very unfortunate during this time because visiting a psychiatrist was starting to be more normal. People were starting to go and deal with their experiences with depression and abuse. But unfortunately, the concept of recovered memories or memories that can only be accessed under hypnosis offered a really quick and easy solution for mental health issues, but it was also very attractive to scam artists. And so I feel like a lot of people got taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But by 1991, 92, it all started to wind down because insurance companies actually started investigating because they're like paying out the ass for this therapy for these individuals to have these lengthy, intense therapy sessions.
I don't know why I never clued in that like, yeah, people are actually going through insurance for this stuff. So it's really interesting that insurance companies might have ended it.
I guess they would, if it becomes public, they would know. But I'm like, how would they know the contents of those sessions and what the insurance is covering?
I don't think they would know the contents, but I think it was the timeline.
Gotcha.
Like, I'm having a 6-hour therapy session every day.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It's like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why is this happening to so many people? Yeah, exactly. So some of these patients, like after 1992, realized that their memories were false and sued their therapist for taking advantage of them.
Mm-hmm.
TV hosts also started to doubt the validity of the stories they were airing and receiving about SRA and repressed memories.
Mm-hmm.
And so with no air being given to these stories, the accusations of SRA at daycares and everywhere else became rare and were largely ignored by the media. Some of the alleged victims of satanic ritual abuse did admit and apologize for making up their stories. And while satanic ritual abuse was largely discredited and clearly exposed the dangers of deregulated commercial television in the 1980s, tabloid media still continued to expand.
Yeah, they took it and ran with it.
Exactly. And although the panic demonstrated that extreme and implausible stories conveyed through this tabloid media were not legally sustainable, it also showed the extent to which tabloid media was shaping, influencing, and transforming the culture, as well as a definition of quote-unquote news.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of showing that this infotainment was doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
And so this whole event really presents a nuanced situation where the only people who know what is true are those that the events happen to. But how do we judge whether or not the events happened? We don't want to invalidate someone who feels so strongly that this traumatic thing happened to them, but we also need to fully explore the possibilities of such an event like not happening.
Yeah. I would start with evidence first. Exactly. And, like obviously not invalidating what they were saying and what they're believing, but it's hard to substantiate a claim if there's nothing to go with it.
Exactly.
Well, exactly. Like, unfortunately,
and a lot of sorry, Rebecca?
Sorry, I was just going to say, like the victim story is so important, and like we should never try to discredit a victim. but there needs to be something else aside from one person's story, like at least circumstantial.
Yeah. Yeah. And like when given this like TV time to share your story, they would never invite the people they were accusing of doing this. So you never heard from the parents who sold their kids to the satanic cult or like whatever. And if you expressed that you didn't believe that this happened, you were labeled a Satanist. So they were just kind of like, you have to believe this. If you don't, done.
Yeah. If you don't, you're part of it. You're part of the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's pretty much it, because this episode could be so much longer. There's literally so much more that we could talk about. But we're like still recovering from the effects of the Satanic Panic, and we still have so much more to learn from it because we're repeating many of the mistakes that happened in this case. The documentary that I watched, Satan Wants You, they kind of end it with some modern parallels. In Pizzagate, I don't know if either of you know what that is.
It sounds familiar.
A bit about it. I know it's about the Clintons and political figures running child sex rings out of pizza shops. Yeah. That's the gist.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like QAnon, I feel like that Wayfair scandal that happened a couple years ago would also be part of this.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. I don't even think it was a couple years ago, because I remember looking into that like last year.
That's because we remembered that it happened and we were like, did this actually happen?
Okay, that makes sense.
At least I did last year. I was like, oh my God, I forgot about this.
I was going on checking like all of the wardrobe prices, seeing why that they're like up at $5,000.
Exactly.
Human in there.
It's one of those things where it's like, we have no evidence that it's actually happening. But what if it is happening? Because that's fun.
Yeah.
And so Ken Lanning, I mentioned him, he was an FBI agent. He ended up working for the behavioral science unit on specifically SRA cases. He has this nice quote that just sums up everything so perfectly. And it goes, "This problem of what people believe when there is no real objective professional evidence of it is an amazing thing to behold."
Yeah. Agreed, Ken. Agreed.
Facts. I know I mentioned like 3 times on that slide that I was done, but I actually have 3 more slides. So one of the directors of Satan Wants You actually grew up in Victoria and lived 10 minutes away from Michelle and Larry.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
And so there's a scene in the book where Michelle is buried alive in a grave in Ross Bay Cemetery. She is then dug up and was reborn and given to the devil by her mother.
Fun.
And he says that growing up, Ross Bay Cemetery was constantly being vandalized, and every Halloween there were like Satanists there, or rumors of Satanists going there. And all through Victoria, there are like stores downtown that allegedly had altars set up in the back. You had to look out for people in black clothes, and the queer bookstore downtown was supposed to be a number one hotspot where children were being sacrificed. So it literally just brings in so many queers.
This does feel so political.
To Satan.
Yes, very political. He also says that a lot of people who grew up during this have forgotten it or never knew it happened in the first place.
Yeah, my parents both have no idea.
Yeah, same. Well, I guess not my mom, but she doesn't associate it with Satanic Panic. It was just like, there's this town in Saskatchewan that's scary, we don't go there.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting considering how huge it was. Another interesting thing was during the documentary, they play tapes of like the actual therapy sessions with Michelle and Larry. Because they were anonymously mailed a tape of this therapy session. And so it was only one tape. They don't know who it came from. It was 60 minutes long, but within that, there was only about 20 minutes of actual words, and the rest was just screaming.
That's
frightening. And they say that you can kind of tell that something is up when you listen to the tape, and you can kind of like hear the uncertainty in her voice. And she says some things that make you question what is happening, such as, "I don't know why I keep remembering different things. When it comes like this, it's almost like I'm making it up. Is it still a memory? Is it still more memory even if it doesn't fit in?" And then Larry responds, "It may not fit in until later." And then they end the documentary with the quote, I can't tell what's real anymore. I couldn't tell what was real. I couldn't tell what was real.
That's not a good thing if you're trying to convict people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even like while this is happening, Michelle's like, I don't believe what I am saying. And Larry's just like, nope, keep it coming. It's
It's
reinforcing. Yeah.
He's just seeing paycheck after paycheck.
Literally.
Yeah.
So Larry Pazder passed away in 2004 from a heart attack in his home, which he shared with Michelle. They remained married until then, I guess.
Wow.
Michelle supposedly hates this book and is convinced it ruined her life. She didn't participate in the documentary, but she was still alive in when it was released in 2022 or 23. She was 27 in 1976 when this all started. So you can do the math. I didn't, I guess, for how old she is now. You cannot Google her. She is nowhere on the internet. You cannot find anything about her. She doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, which I find super wild because he does.
Could Michelle be an alias then?
I don't know, because she it almost has to be.
Or she has changed her name since and tried to remove all.
Yeah. I don't know. I could not find her at all anywhere on the internet. Yeah, so and you can't actually buy Michelle Remembers.
Oh,
really?
Can you torrent it?
I have no idea.
We don't do such things, but can you torrent it?
I don't know. I don't use torrent. But yeah, I found one book on on Amazon, and it was $873 for a used copy that someone just had in their basement.
Holy shit.
Oh, wow. All right. Guess we're not reading it anytime soon.
Yeah, I know. So if anyone has a copy that they'd like to send us, I would love to read that book, actually.
Yeah. We'll send it back.
Yes.
We'll scan all the pages and send it back.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I'm sure you could find it online somewhere sketchy, but I just didn't take the time to do that.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
And then the last thing I will say is a quote by Lawrence Pazder that goes, "I believe in the pain that they experience as a child. The details of what they present, I'm not there to believe or not believe. I'm there to try and understand what they're trying to tell me of an experience, and those experiences are not simple to separate from whether that has actually happened to them or that is their way of trying to express a profound pain that they've experienced beyond their body, in their very heart, in their very soul." End quote.
That's such a sad quote.
Right? So it sounds like he started off with really, really good intentions.
Yeah. And then he saw the paycheck. He saw the money, and he said, I know how to exploit this.
Yeah.
It almost feels kind of Stockholm Syndrome-y in a way.
Yeah. And you don't know who the
stuff.
Yeah, the documentary did a really good job of you don't know who the bad guy is in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Did Michelle kind of lie to him and tell him all these things so that she could have him? Or did he manipulate her into believing these things? Was it just a team effort unconsciously? There's still a lot of questions around it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it feels like a lot of them probably won't be answered because the Satanic Panic was back in the 70s, 80s.
Exactly. And Michelle won't speak on it.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the forefronts of that whole movement or whatever, and she won't speak on it now, which I can't blame her.
But yeah, because I can't imagine carrying, whether or not those things happen, carrying on your conscience the amount of lives that were ruined by false accusations.
Yeah, exactly.
That you started. Yeah. I don't know. It was wild. I really enjoyed researching this topic. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, it was super interesting. I remember reading a podcast. I listened to a podcast. I think while we were still at SMU, actually. I used to listen to it on the bus on my way, and it was a 4 or 5 part series about people who were victims of the Satanic Panic, whether they were kids of it or whether they were adults that were claimed to be perpetrating it.
Yeah.
But it's just so fascinating. It's sort of a mass hysteria.
It very much is. I wrote a paper about it and related it to the witch trials and alien abductions.
Yeah.
I can see that. It does feel very similar. It's because alien, I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. Sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts and I'm struggling, but I understand what you mean comparing it to that. Like, we don't know if aliens are real or not, just like we don't know if Satan's real or not. So it's so easy to make up these stories that sound so elaborate because there's no way that you can prove or disprove. Scientifically, we'd say no, yeah, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But it just adds to the mystery of it all.
Yeah, and with alien abduction specifically, like, we can't say whether or not that person was abducted, but something happened to them, and they believe it's an alien abduction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, Journey, thank you so much for leading us through that discussion. I was so excited for this episode. That was so fascinating. I'm really hoping our audience learned a lot today because just like I do every week, I feel like I have learned a lot from you guys. So thank you so much for sharing the case study of David Berkowitz and for sharing the history and all of like the kind of weird goings on of the Satanic Panic. Just before we get into the next topic or announcing the next topic, I just have a really quick forensic corner. Really quick, really explain like I'm 5 because I don't understand AI very much, but this was super cool. So I found a research article that was published by the Columbia University School of Engineering and Applied Science. They've been working on this, I believe, since 2021, but as far as I'm aware, it was published in January 2024. And it was regarding using artificial intelligence in a forensic setting, specifically to identify fingerprints.
Oh, cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so they were working with an AI system known as Deep Contrastive Network, which is the thing I'm going to say. I'll admit I did try to look it up to explain it further, and I was just so confused. But they're working with this cool AI system that basically does its own machine learning with the input you give it. And an undergraduate student was the one who was kind of started this. He found a database, the US government. I don't know if the US government published it or it became unclassified, but it was a database of 60,000 different fingerprints.
Wow. Isn't that just APHIS? Is APHIS
no,
available
I actually
to
looked it
everyone?
up and it wasn't, at least they didn't name the database, but I think APHIS has, I looked it up, like 2 or 3 or more million fingerprints. Which is why I was thinking maybe not that one, but I could be wrong. But yeah, so he basically loaded the fingerprints into the system to kind of train the AI like on identifying them. And of course, because AI specifically in this kind of use isn't perfect, they were getting a lot of errors and stuff. Like it was starting to try to match fingerprints that didn't match. However, they did find that it started to make fingerprint pairings of fingerprints that were not identical to each other, but they actually both belong to the same person.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's like at a crime scene, if the one perpetrator left their thumbprint in one room and their pinky print in another room, we can't match those because they're 2 different fingerprints. But somehow this AI, they're still working on it, but they've gotten it up to 77% of the time. It'll make an accurate identification, whether it's 2 fingerprints that are exactly alike or whether it's 2 separate fingerprints that belong to the same individual.
That's so
cool.
fascinating.
Right? I was so excited reading this.
Technology and smart people scare me.
I know.
The fact that that's a thing now.
I know. It's so fascinating, but it's also something we can kind of learn from because like they, again, I'm not sure how they did it. I don't know if they dug into the code of the AI. I don't know how that works, but basically they were trying to figure out, the researchers, why the AI was able to do this when humans are not able to currently like make these connections, like fingerprints between same person. And so they found that the AI, while it was kind of teaching itself to match fingerprints, isn't using what we commonly use to match them, like the minutia, which go and listen to our fingerprint episode. But little quick rundown. The minutiae are just like the little tiny patterns and discrepancies throughout your fingerprint and your ridges that make it unique. So generally in like a human investigation, they'll identify 13 separate matching minutiae to determine a fingerprint. However, this was actually analyzing the angles and curves of like between the patterns of the center of the fingerprint. So like the whorls, loops, and arches. So it's almost like it was kind of using a more like mathematic method. Yeah. So I still have no idea how it's determining that they belong to the same person.
Yeah.
But obviously, because it's so new, it's not super useful right now, but I can definitely see the future benefit of this science.
Yeah. I'm so excited to watch it evolve.
I know. Me too. I feel like so much that we share in Forensic Corner lately is like brand new stuff that's like, whoa, we get to see this evolve.
Right?
Oh, it's so exciting.
That's so cool.
Yeah, but with that being said, our next topic of discussion is going to be a recent case that I don't think any of us have a lot of familiarity on. But one of our wonderful, lovely listeners actually reached out to us and asked if we could kind of have a discussion, have a chat about it. So we're going to kind of look over the case details, look over the autopsy report because they publicly made it available, of the recent case of the homicide victim, Noah Pressgrove. So definitely stay tuned for that because it is something that's kind of in the media right now and still under investigation. Yeah, and we can't wait to talk about it. But
yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to actually look at the autopsy document about it. But with that being said, if you enjoyed this episode, you want to learn more about us, more about our content, you can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and TikTok, all at What the Forensics. Journey makes some pretty cool TikToks for us on What the Forensics and like really cool sound bites and stuff. So really, definitely go give that a look. It's pretty entertaining. We also do have X or Twitter. It's WT Forensics Pod. It's not updated as frequently as everything else, but we are making an effort now. And then our absolute one-stop shop for everything. It's all of our book and website reviews and our sources and our images and all about us is our website, whattheforensics.ca. On there, you can also contact us with any questions, concerns, or just something you wanted to tell us, or email us at whattheforensics@gmail.com. And finally, please be sure to give us a review. You're listening wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's just a like or a dislike, but hopefully like, or a review from like 1 to 5. And one more thing before we go, because there's a few housekeeping things we just got to keep up with. Recently, Apple Podcasts has stopped auto-downloading if you're following us. But I believe you can go in and select them to auto-download as long as you're following our podcast. So if you want to keep staying as up-to-date as you can on new releases, if you're on Apple Podcasts, definitely be sure to go manually click that auto-download button. But with that being said, this has been another episode of What the Forensics. We really hope you enjoyed it. I know I sure enjoyed it, and I think Journey and Nicole did too. We hope you're having a great day, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.